Ravi saw through Graham Platner, and I didn't. So we'll start by talking about what I and so many others missed, plus what happens next in Maine. There's a cease in the ceasefire, and it was entirely predictable. Is it possible for Trump to put the crap back in the horse? That's not the actual expression. Before the midterms. We'll catch up on the Michigan Senate race and revisit Trump's ill-fated intervention in the World Cup. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who vote for progress and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority.
All right, Jason, obviously big news this week is that earlier this week, Politico published an article with an accusation of rape against Graham Platner, fairly detailed. And then there was a follow-up story in the Washington Post with a different woman, an ex-girlfriend of Platner, who told the Post that he repeatedly removed protection without her consent during sex. So that's two sexual assault allegations this week. Most backers of Platner have called on him to step down. His sort of chief strategist, Morris Katz, or whatever his title in the campaign is apparently on his way to Maine or in Maine right now to talk to Platner. We got a video from the Maine Democratic Party executive director last night that was pointed. Let's go to this clip.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to provide you all an update on the U.S. Senate race here in Maine. As you know, the Maine Democratic Party has been working around the clock to develop a process to replace our U.S. Senate nominee that is open, inclusive, transparent, and fair. The integrity of this process is just as important as the outcome, and we are committed to ensuring that Democrats across our state can have confidence in both. Unfortunately, Graham Platner's team has repeatedly reached out to us in an attempt to put their thumb on the scale of what this process looks like. We have repeatedly reiterated to Graham Platner's team that they have no role in determining our next Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate, nor in determining what this process looks like. We have also reiterated that Graham Platner must drop out of this race so that Democrats in Maine can focus on defeating Susan Collins this November. We look forward to making this process public as soon as Graham Platner formally withdraws from this race.
So the Platner campaign shot back this morning with the following unsigned statement. So there was no name to this, but quote, the Platner campaign has reached out to the party to try and understand what this process would look like. At no point has the campaign tried to put its finger on the scale. Over 150,000 Mainers voted for this movement, and over 15,000 Mainers volunteered their time and energy to it. While Graham wouldn't want to be a part of the process, he would want to make sure the voters and volunteers make this decision, not the political establishment. There's some conflicting stuff out there. You know, Peter Stern from City and State reported that Platner and Katz see three candidates as the most acceptable potential replacements. Former Maine Senate President Troy Jackson, Maine Secretary of State Shenna Bellows, and Maine State Representative Valley Geiger. I think the significance of City and State is, you probably don't know much about them, but they're a New York outlet. Katz is like a New York political operative, so it suggests that it's possible he was the source for that. Where should we start with this?
Well, okay, I'll start. Let's start with the fact that you and I interviewed him a few weeks ago, and you were appropriately pretty, like, you asked some pointed questions and like kind of actually tried to get some answers out of him. And on the tattoo thing, I definitely was like, it doesn't matter. And I was wrong. And you and I had a conversation not on air about this yesterday, where I said that I think one of my weaknesses politically is the same weakness that I had when hiring people, which is I am often so inclined to see like only the good that I do sometimes miss the red flags. And it's why like my former chief of staff at one point was like, I'm doing the hiring now, like, and I was like, that's for the best. And it makes, the other thing, I think my judgment was partially clouded by just the fact that, like, obviously this was before any sexual assault allegations came out. That's obviously a complete and totally different thing. But I have so many friends who are veterans with PTSD who at some point did self-destructive or stupid things. And so I think as a result, like it, and that's not like, let's be clear, the stuff he's being accused of has nothing to do with that. But it probably caused me to miss some of the red flags. And I think that there's a lot of other people in that boat. And I think the most important thing to do is to say, yeah, missed that one. Let's try not to make that mistake again. As far as what happens next and the statement by the Platner campaign, I think it's important to acknowledge two competing realities here. One is Graham Platner has obviously not earned in any way personally the right to weigh in on who becomes the nominee. Like that's just not how this works. But at the same time, the people who worked on Graham Platner's campaign and have put a lot of time, particularly the volunteers who've put a lot of time into this effort, they're not accused of doing anything wrong. And it is not complete. It is not hard to see how they might feel like, hey, we have laid the groundwork for a candidate to come along and have a chance this fall, and we would like to have a say in who that candidate is because we're probably going to be the people out there beating the bushes and knocking the doors. And so I think the Maine Democratic Party is going to have to square that, don't you?
Yeah, I had never met this woman before, the head of the party, but it seems just based on one clip that, I mean, based on that very limited information, she seems to have her head screwed on straight about this. And, there are processes. I mean, obviously none of this is ideal. Nobody asked for this. There's a limited amount of people who had more information than others, or more culpability, right? People have been following me outside this podcast know who I've been upset at over this, but there is a process. There are members of the party. They're going to lay out details for what the process is. I imagine it will involve whatever the equivalent of delegates or whatever are in the state, right? And that's just the best you could do at this point. And whoever wants to throw their hat in the ring, needs to make a case to those people. We forget that, presidents have been picked like this. Lincoln was nominated in a nominating convention. Like, none of this is great. I, like you, like anybody listening to this and the Maine people, want folks to exercise their franchise. The sad reality is that sometimes you exercise your franchise and somebody could die. Sometimes you exercise your franchise and they could be credibly accused of rape after you exercise your franchise. And that's where we are today. And so, yeah, I agree. He has no say in this whatsoever. And actually, I suspect that if he did weigh in, it could backfire. So
yes, those three candidates that were mentioned are probably like, please don't endorse me.
Stay away from me.
I think I don't know exactly how the process works in Maine, but there is one of the most common ways this works, and it's the way it works in Missouri, is when you have it's akin to like when there's a special election. And so all those party officials, those folks who are like, they're, county committee people, or they're the head of this this congressional district committee or this state Senate committee, however it works in Maine, it's probably that those people come together and choose who the nominee is in this situation. It's probably something like that. And if that is the case, then what I think this requires is for those individuals who are under the law and under the party bylaws entrusted with that responsibility, is for them to actively reach out to and listen to the people who have been the activists on the front lines of this campaign, laying the groundwork and building the connections for this campaign to potentially be successful, because whoever the next candidate is hopefully going to inherit as many of those campaigners and volunteers as possible. And so I think it's really important that those folks feel that they're heard, because you want their morale to be as high as possible going into November, so that they want to get out and work hard for that candidate.
Yeah, you'd imagine like there's like some kind of delegates process, right? And maybe you rent like the biggest convention center there is in Maine and invite anybody to come who's a member of the party, right? Like you're a registered Democrat, buy tickets, come. We'll hear from all the speakers. We'll feel the energy. There's no like scientific way to do it, right? So it's got to be like come. Here are the
It's
pitches in like a week, you know. So it's like,
so I
it's
wouldn't
crazy.
do it that way. The way I think the most practical way to do it is to figure out who the most influential people are within that movement who are not Graham Platner and are not probably paid even members of his campaign. And it's not, Maine's not that big of a state, so you're going to know who those people are, and to bring those people in and to have real meetings with them and to make sure that they really feel like they were part of the decision. And because honestly, they probably should be. Because if they really are the people who, because this wasn't really about, like, his campaign was not really about Graham Platner the person. It was about the things he was saying. And if those ideas are what excited people, you want to make sure that those ideas are that the people who are excited about those ideas are still excited.
Yeah, the downside though is like, what happens in the very possible case where you bring people together and there's conflicting views as to who it should be?
Which is why I wouldn't do it in like a makeshift 1 week put together convention, right? Because there's no way that's not going to go. It's just going to be really hard to make people feel heard in a situation where they're all shouting at each other.
Yeah, I do think there's a huge risk here, given how we got here, that there will be a lot of anti-establishment rhetoric, no matter what this party chooses, because so much of the language around establishment is almost like blanket. If you've been in office a certain amount of time, if you spend time within the quote unquote party, right? And, you know, this young woman, you know, who is on this video is a member of the quote unquote party. So if she strays from what pick random person from outside of Maine decides should happen, she'll wake up to like a wave of hate. And I think these things are very likely, no matter who they pick. So there's going to be a lot of intimidation tactics. There's going to be a lot of, you know, live wires that she could step on. And how do we know this? Because a lot of this stuff was at play before any of this happened. You know, this is part of what I've spent the past few days digging up and debating with people. I've heard from a lot of our audience who kind of came out of the woodwork, and I would say 99-1 people were kind of feeling me on this one, which is rare. But I feel like people were feeling like they were being mocked and intimidated for raising questions about Platner, which obviously you didn't do. And I clarified that too.
Yeah, I mean, I never even endorsed him, but look,
yeah.
I definitely, just because he's, you know, because of his own profile, his own background, probably, and because I have so many friends who, I said it all already. I was less inclined. I was like less quick to identify the flaws because my judgment is clouded by that, you know? And, but yes, I agree with you that there are a lot of people who were like, get over it, get past it. He's the guy, you know? And it's like, and I never really got there because I had friends like you and like Paul Rykoff, people I really respect, who were like, hey, no, this is a huge problem. And that's what kept me from ever going as far as being like, no, it's fine, because I just had too many people I knew well and respected whose opinions were the opposite of mine, that I was like, I should hold off saying anything publicly because I might be wrong. And I'm glad I held off because I was wrong.
Well, you know, part of what got us here, and I alluded to this in an earlier podcast, but it's worth kind of hearing it. And I think this might be an interview with the Wall Street Journal or PBS. I can't remember who, but this is an interview from a few weeks ago, or maybe like a month or two ago, with Daniel Moraff and Leanne Fahn, who are sort of out-of-staters who have this sort of like organized effort to recruit candidates who had gone to Maine to try to find a populist candidate. And this is how they described when some of like initial stuff came out, Reddit posts, tattoos and stuff like this.
Before we play this, let me tee it up by saying this. When I first saw this video circulating, I did not think it was real. I actually thought, because, you know, The Onion just, you know, The Onion took over InfoWars and The Onion just started publishing things on InfoWars. It was a good 30, 45 seconds into this when I was like, oh, no, this is real. I thought it was satire.
Yeah.
So this is something.
So a couple interesting things here. Number one, the chuckling at the idea of vetting, I just thought was interesting.
Yeah. Also, what is a vat exactly?
Vat, I guess it's like a vat is where you mix chemicals or whatever. So like this is a false choice, of course. Like you can have a more authentic candidate when you were running, one of the reasons why we're friends is because I always felt you were that. And so you could be authentic, you could be different. We've had so many of these candidates on here before, and not be a rapist. And so like these, and not have other things, right? That there is a limit, right? Everybody might have a different limit. Like, I mentioned this on my podcast. Like, say somebody got a DUI 10 years ago, and then they went to Alcoholics Anonymous, and they haven't had a drink since, or haven't had more than one drink since, never got behind the wheel, and have a story to tell about how they've changed. I'm not asking for people to be perfect. And I voted for many imperfect people over the years. That is a far cry from some of the things we're being asked to tolerate here. And sometimes, I know we're in an anti-elite environment, but if you're going in for brain surgery, you want an elite surgeon. If you want a campaign, you need elite campaigners. You need people who are going to vet people, who are going to use that information in a smart way. Sometimes it means a person shouldn't run. Sometimes it means you get ahead of your own information and tell your own story, right? There are just many ways to do it. These are clearly not elite people. Like, they don't know how to run campaigns. Yet they seemingly come from a place of extreme arrogance to the point where they can just chuckle away the idea of vetting a candidate in a state they don't even live in, that they're plucking from obscurity and pushing forward.
Well, I agree that the vetting was clearly non-existent, almost non-existent. What I will say is, like, obviously now it's easy for everybody to look back now that these allegations have come out and been like, this was a huge problem. And I think the lesson for me is to realize that while it is entirely possible that people can change, what we were counting on, given that this stuff was not that long ago. And so, like, my error and my lesson learned is, like, probably we're going to need some more time between, like, in the future, when there's a candidate who has, mistakes in their past, I'm going to have a greater expectation that there be a greater degree of time that passes between when those mistakes happened and when they are ready to run, and for me to feel like, okay, you truly have grown. And so, I understand, like, the stuff about, where he said some things that he regretted. Like, I think that's all forgivable, but in the future, I will probably feel like, yeah, but it was just like 3 or 4 years ago. And that'll be a lesson learned for me going forward.
You got to give it some time. I had a friend who, like, obviously rape is different.
Yeah, like, this whole conversation is like,
yeah,
assuming that these allegations had never come out.
Yes. Yeah.
Which obviously, the second these allegations came out, to credit everybody in the party, and we'll get to this in a moment, that really makes us distinct from the other party, is that was a deal breaker for literally every person, like, establishment or not, progressive movement or not. Nobody in our party was like, it's fine. Everybody was like, okay, that's the end of that then.
Right. Yeah. The only thing I've seen, here and there, Young Turks, whatever, but I saw some, like, due process arguments, which in a court of law, of course, is the standard, right? But one of the reasons why I didn't think Kavanaugh, even beyond ideological reasons, wasn't fit to serve on the Supreme Court is because the more important the position you're asking for, the quicker we have to be on the trigger to pull somebody back, right? Even if they were being tried in a court, it would be different, right? Like, if I were on a jury or I was a judge, I'm applying beyond a reasonable doubt evidence, the ability to counter claims. That takes time, all of these things.
Right. And so, like, if somebody's already in a job and you have time to apply, like, okay, well, let's let an investigation run its course or whatever, that's very different than, like, the ballots are about to be printed.
Right.
Right.
And it's also, there's nuances, right? Like, what happened with Joe Biden is a good example, right? Where, like, sometimes you have an entire history with somebody and you have a particular political climate, and you have to weigh the sort of the quality of the evidence you have in front of you with what you know about the person. The reason why I think so many people, including Platner supporters, were quick was because so many other things from so many different types of people were coming out, so that it was hard to concoct this argument that they did make against that Republican woman who accused him, by the way, a couple months ago. A lot of people were making those arguments against her. which I think should be examined at some point. But they did not. I think too many people saw too many things at a certain point where like there's nothing to hang your hat on here in terms of
it's also, if you were going with the theory that okay, this person has changed a lot from the person who was behaving a certain way when they were drinking too much and that kind of thing, these allegations don't necessarily change that, but the difference is that this behavior, there's never going to be a point at which you say, well, it's okay because that was the former version of you. Because it's like, if the former version of you did that, you may be an entirely different person now, but that's the kind of thing where it is disqualifying for any version of you to have potentially done that. And that's a big difference.
Yeah, well, you mentioned this, but Sarah Longwell tweeted the following: Graham Platner was accused of rape, and every Democrat tossed him overboard. Donald Trump was accused of rape multiple times and sexual assault and harassment many more times. Also, the whole matter of trying to overturn an election. Republicans nominated him a second time. I mean, I don't even have time to name all the others.
Right.
Herschel Walker, Roy Moore, on and on, Matt Gaetz. And then we have this Max Miller fellow who has some horrendous allegations against him, currently running for re-election. There was an interesting moment on Fox News about this yesterday.
A lot of bad individuals who are rising up in politics right now. It includes Graham Platner. He's got to go. But the fact that you just sit here and said that nobody cares that Max Miller beat his wife is highly alarming.
We're not here to talk about Max Miller. We're here to talk about Graham Platner. I think we got to be talking about all of it, because if we're not policing this conduct from people, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, it's not right. Nobody has the moral high ground. But the topic today is Graham Platner.
No,
that's why we're here. We're talking about Graham Platner. If we want to do another segment on the congressman you're bringing up or the candidate,
you let me know when we're going to book a segment on Max Miller, because I haven't heard a lot about it from Republicans.
Fox.
That's fine.
I love you let me know as soon as we're going to have that segment. It's a great point, because their narrator would say that they did not have that segment.
Right. Well, it is a difference. And it's worth pointing out. Like, it's hard sometimes to have the conversation in party. And then obviously sometimes people, and I imagine some people in the audience will be like, what about this? What about that? Well, we want to beat Trump. We want to beat Trump. We do not want to be Trump. So like, we want to beat this. We want to beat MAGA. We want to beat the descent into immorality. We want to beat it. We don't want to become it. So this is how we beat it. We have to beat it internally, and we have to beat it externally. We have to vanquish the people who exhibit this behavior in the other party, and we have to not tolerate it within our own. And I know Trump has defied so much logic of politics, and I think we get ourselves into trouble thinking that that's both something to replicate or something that we would want to replicate, right? Trump is a singular figure. So even if you did think this was the kind of thing we should tolerate, he has defied political logic in the way that a lot of people haven't. Like, look at Roy Moore, for example. In Alabama, he lost, right? So there are a lot more people who eventually go down over this kind of stuff than stick around. Now, he is remaking his party to make it more and more tolerable. But again, we don't want to follow that. That's not a world we want to live in.
Yeah, no, for a while, everybody was saying we need our own Trump. And I've always felt like, no. I mean, if what you mean is we need somebody who comes into politics and already has the cultural footprint that he had, sure, that'd be great. But they, like, so long as they're a good person who wants to do good things. But I'm not trying to
Yeah. Well, Justin Slaughter, who's the husband of Becca Slaughter, who we mentioned, I think, last week, who is the outgoing chair of the FTC, who was fired by Trump. He's been tweeting some interesting stuff about this whole dynamic, and I'll just read from part of it. He had a whole thread. He said, I'll have more thoughts on this whole Platner thing, and it's a appalling end later, but I think the macro political significance of it is everyone realizing he was part of a coherent and focused faction that is oriented not at beating the GOP, but of taking control of the Democratic Party. Now, I think this is left to be debated. I don't think this is set in stone.
I don't think I agree with it.
I think it is true in certain places. I see it in some places. Obviously, some of these primaries in places like New York and safe seats, those are unquestionably about the future of the party. Now, do they detract from other general elections and races? In a direct way, no. Like, like the argument then becomes, well, having Chevalier type candidates, does that hurt the party or help the party in the long run? And I think that is a debate that the party has to have, right? And I still believe in primaries. And I think primaries are the mechanism to have these conversations, whether I like the results of some of them or not, and I think there's going to be trial and error. I think there are going to be candidates who make it through. We'll talk about Michigan in a second, who are testing theories people have. And you get enough data points, you'll get the sense of, well, how does Roy Cooper do versus an Abdul Al-Sayed, right? We'll start to see different types of candidates. Roy Cooper is an establishment guy. Abdul is not an establishment guy. We'll get a bunch of little data points in the midterms, and then we'll be heading into a presidential election where people can assess how these candidates do in different races.
I just generally find the whole conversation about it really hit sort of a high mark with AOC's election. The whole, is it good for the party nationally or not to have people like AOC in the party? And I always find it to be kind of an academic and useless conversation, because all politics is local. And so, look, those districts in New York are going to elect Democrats. And so long as you have an infrastructure that says we're going to have only Democrats vote to choose who's going to elect this district, which is functionally what's going to happen because the Republicans not going to win that district, you're going to get much more progressive Democrats representing those districts. Now, if people want to change it to, like, in every place have wide open primaries to where or jungle primary, then maybe you're going to get a different result. But if that's the case, then you can't really get upset that people in New York are going to have a debate about which kind of Democrat is going to represent them without regard to how it's going to affect governance in the rest of the country. Or you can't even ask them to be focused on beating the GOP when there's no way the GOP is going to have a member of Congress represent them, right? Now, on the other side of it, for places where it is a little bit more competitive and you've got DSA candidates running, I don't think it is accurate or fair to say they just want to take over the party, because the way the system works is you got to win the division to go to the series. And that means you got to win the primary to go to the general. So the first thing they have to do is win a primary. Then after that, they have to win a general. And most of them that I talk to genuinely do believe that in addition to the set of policies they believe in being what they believe should happen for the country, they genuinely believe that if those policies were espoused by a unified party, then that party would be more likely to beat the Republicans. That is almost all of them believe.
Yeah, and the thing is, and I agree with so much of what you were saying. I think they are open about the fact that they're spreading this beyond New York, right? So they're going after people, sitting members in a lot of cases, and obviously also open seats, and they're pressuring people. Now that is your right. I'm not saying this is illegitimate, but it also is my right to say I disagree with what you are asking our candidates to do. And that is the debate that we're going to be having. We'll talk about Michigan.
And I think the way you approach that is right, because what I don't think is right is the more establishment people who keep saying, who are acting like, but you're spoiling what we're trying to do electorally. The way you have, and you and I, like, I'm a little to the left of you on this stuff, but the way you talk about it is you say, I don't think that a lot of your policy ideas are necessarily going to work. You don't even mean electorally.
I mean in both in a lot of cases, but in both cases.
That's really important, right? Whereas when Chuck Schumer was recruiting Janet Mills, look, I'm not trying to say anything bad about Chuck Schumer personally, but having run in the most competitive Senate race in a year where he was kind of counting on my race for him to become majority leader, we spent a lot of time together, and I can tell you, Chuck Schumer cared about what would win, and he looked at it and just believed he was doing old political math. Governor, 2 terms, moderate, in a somewhat swingish state, we're running this person. That's how he was thinking about it. And also probably, I know where the money comes from for this person. That's, how he thinks. And it's not an indictment of Schumer. It's how most people in that role think. And I'm just saying that when those people turn to the DSA organizers and others and say, you're wrong, that won't work, they're going to be dismissed. But like, if you're somebody like you who's saying, look, I've seen this in New York, it's not actually going to work from a policy perspective necessarily the way you think. Let's do it this way. I think that is a more credible way to have that conversation with them, as opposed to sort of the Schumer class, which sounds more like, hey, kids, know your place, get off the lawn. And that's just never going to work.
Yeah. And I think it's like, to me, it's the messaging too. And we'll get to Michigan. Like, I think that these messages don't work in general elections by and large. And we'll get to some of those. And I just think some of them are just morally wrong campaign tactics. Again, you're legitimately allowed to run. I'm legitimately allowed to tell you I disagree with what you're doing. And I think sometimes people are stuck between this choice between, is it Schumer? Is it DSA? And the way I look at it is, well, like Tallarico and Rob Sand and all these people, Mallory was a good example who's dropped out. Like, there are a lot of people out there who reject both of those ends. I've been against, you think about like, when you met me at Arena, we were running people. The party didn't want us to run. Some of them are now the quote unquote establishment. Right. Some of them are the anti-establishment in the same races.
You and I were these people.
Yeah.
Is like, that's why I have sympathy for it. Is like, we were the upstarts. I mean, until I was running for the Senate, I had never really been, I had made my way and made myself the nominee for things. But like, my first race for the state legislature, I was 26 years old and I ran against two people who were very, deeply connected either in the community or in the state capitol. And I was told by many people not to run. Right. I mean, and now, and I guess it's different because that wasn't because my politics were too far left. It's just because I was new. But I think the dynamic, like, that's what we have to be careful of, is that dynamic doesn't feel that different when you're on the receiving end of it.
Yeah, we'll get to some more. We'll ground this in specifics in Michigan in a second, but let's take a break. When we come back, I think we're maybe at war with Iran again. We'll talk about that. Trump is lashing out at the Spaniards, and then we'll talk Michigan and some other stories like the World Cup when we come back. I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you, but when I was first moving into this new apartment here, I bought a bunch of different stuff. I would go online, I would purchase something, and the reviews would be awesome, the photos look great, and then you get something and you're like, wait, this isn't what I bought. This happened to me not too long ago, multiple times. Quality's off, things don't look the way that they looked in the photos. This is why I had wished at the time I knew about dupe.com and their new research for me tool. And so for a lot of subsequent purchases, I'd use dupe.com, and their research for me tool. And it's amazing. No ads at top, no sponsored best picks that, people paid for. They just walk you through the options. What I really like is it's real sources from real people. They filtered out sponsored links and recommendations, and they just give you a straight answer. You also get a full breakdown of features, specs, pricing. My favorite part is it tells you what not to buy, which obviously can save you a lot of money and make things, easier and less expensive for you. So if it takes research to buy it, let Dupe do it for you. Stop wasting time comparing options. Just go to dupe.com and tell it what you're looking for. That's dupe.com to finally feel confident about what to buy. This summer, I have a ton of plans that are going to keep me on the move, mostly in the tri-state area because I really don't want to hop on an airplane. And summer vacation often means sometimes a different bed, a different place, a different schedule. But the one thing I try to keep consistent is AG1. And those of you who have been listening to this podcast for a long time know that I have been talking about AG1 before they ever became a sponsor. I started using them before this podcast ever existed. It's just 1 scoop plus 8 ounces of water every morning. It helps you maintain energy, support gut health, support immune health. It's clinically shown to support gut health and fill in common nutrient gaps. It is the supplement that I take with me
whenever I'm traveling anywhere, and I have to make a hard choice. It's a daily health drink with a multivitamin, pre and probiotics, superfoods, antioxidants, just 1 scoop, 8 ounces of water. And I know that this is the time to chill, late nights, long weekends, spontaneous plans. AG1 can help you stay consistent. It's high quality nutritional support every single day, no matter where you start your morning. It has a next-gen formula. It delivers 75 plus ingredients, clinically shown to support your gut health, fill common nutrient gaps, improve nutrient levels within 3 months. And it fits perfectly into your daily routine. And what I particularly love is that it's NSF certified for sports to ensure the high quality and safety of AG1. So visit drinkag1/majority to get a free AG1 travel case. These are so helpful, and 7 free AG1 travel packs in your welcome kit, and your first AG1 subscription order while supplies last. That's drinkag1.com/majority.
All right. Well, Trump, who signed this, as he describes it, historic peace deal with Iran, which was really an MOU, now says that he believes the ceasefire deal with Iran is over, and that the U.S. is likely to carry out more strikes in addition to some strikes that he's carried out over the past 24 hours. And so he hit Karg Island. He's hit certain strategic assets of the Iranians. The Iranians have retaliated and hit Gulf states. And so we are back with a probably the status quo, which is a fake MOU back and forth between the United States and Iran. No sure passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Nothing stopping Iran from developing nuclear weapons, and an erratic president in Trump who can't be trusted to tell us what's going on.
So our first segment of the show today was me talking about like my read of the political situation being wrong. And this one seems to be, unfortunately, my read where I said that this will be in this perpetual state of semi-war being right. And I really wish I could flip them. I wish it could turn out that Graham Platner was not problematic and was a great candidate and hadn't had any of these allegations. And Trump actually was able to make a deal with Iran and the war would end. But that's not what's happening. And so, at some point, are we going to just stop calling it a ceasefire? Because it's, when you look at the words together, cease and fire, it's very difficult to say things like this headline. So, okay, he's saying it's over, but there's been a lot of headlines about the ceasefire being disrupted. And it's like, that's not a ceasefire being disrupted. That's a ceasefire not happening. That's like the war is still happening. I saw where he said, that, if the negotiators want to keep negotiating, that's fine, but I'm over it. And it's like, okay. So that like you cannot undermine peace negotiators more than to be like, whatever happens there, I'm not interested. So I think that not only is this going to go through the midterms, I think more than likely there's going to be an on-again, off-again war with Iran that is going to make oil prices go like this, and occasionally a bunch of people, including some innocent people, die. And I think that will probably carry on and be handed to the next president.
Yeah. We've talked about that as the most likely scenario for a while. It seems almost certain at this point. Trump was in Europe for the NATO summit, and that's where some of this news was breaking. And he did a few things that are, worth mentioning. One is he started talking about Greenland again. And two is that he called Spaniards, of all people, hopeless bad people, because the Spanish head of state was pretty early in not letting Trump bully him. And essentially said he was going to cut off trade with Spain, which would be hard to do because the EU negotiates together, not separately. And he called out France, Germany, Italy, and Britain by name for not joining the Iran war, which, by the way, he said he didn't need them for. But now he's upset that they didn't join us.
Prior to Trump, I focused a lot of my ire at massive American foreign policy blunders at George W. Bush. And I have not come to the point that others I've heard espouse where they're like, I kind of miss George W. Bush and I'm cool with George W. Bush now. You know, as somebody who, you know, served in Afghanistan and had a lot of my friends serve in Iraq, like I'm probably never going to get there. But what I will say is it seemed like Bush was trying. He was bad at it. And he made some awful, awful, awful choices. And in some cases, I think many of those choices were moral failings and not just strategic blunders. But, you know, I was in the military while he was president, and I don't really ever remember feeling like he didn't care at all and wasn't trying at all. For instance, when he had his coalition of the willing go into Iraq, which was just, you know, which didn't include a bunch of countries that were our traditional allies, he didn't do stuff that was so stupid that he went out and he talked smack on the countries that didn't join us. He didn't have trade implications or threats of trade implications against them as a result. And it's just that everything Trump does in this regard is what you would do if you were trying to make it so that we had to go alone in every military or diplomatic situation for the next 20 years. If that was your goal as president, you would do things hardly at all differently than the way Trump is doing.
Yeah. Well, shall we talk about Michigan?
Sure.
All right. Well, the kiss of death that is the Majority 54 podcast, McMorrow dropped out, who's just on our podcast. She was one of three major candidates in that race. And so it's now down to Haley Stevens and Abdul Al-Sayed, which is going to be a tough and vicious fight throughout the summer. They debated last night. And the polling here, there was a poll just released by Tavern Research that shows it essentially tied. And I've been hearing different things from the campaigns. Like this was pre-Mallory dropping out, but
am I right in remembering that all three of these candidates were arena?
Yeah, in some way. Yeah. Like they're, you
for
know,
those
two of
who
them were
don't know,
fellows, and then Abdul was always at our events, and I've spoken. Like,
I
on
think
stage with him
Abdul, I
before.
think I met him at, I also met him when I was campaigning for, I don't remember who in Michigan, Gary Peters probably. But I met him there, but I think I originally met him at a arena thing. I don't remember if I met Haley Stevens, but that's so funny. The impact.
Been at multiple events. I've spoken on stage with him. He's come on my podcast before.
He's a really smart and compelling. He's a smart guy and a really compelling speaker. That's, you know.
Well, this is what I think it's time to get to, right? So like, I do think he's smart, which is why this clip from yesterday's debate caught my attention. Because on the surface, the math with what I'm about to play doesn't make sense to me, but let me talk through it. Let's just first watch this clip.
For that, I think we need to be freezing property tax for seniors. If you paid off your home at some point, we can't expect you to keep up with property taxes that are going up. Now, how do we pay for that? Well, again, if we tax billionaires their wealth, if we were to invest in the Department of Education so that we're paying centrally for public schools in an equitable way, there are a lot of opportunities for us to lift the burden off of seniors who've done their job. They've worked extra hard. They deserve a dignified retirement, and we've got to be thinking about how to offer them that.
Congressman, 30 seconds.
So we're now in the phase of socialism where we're not taxing people anymore. Like, I don't understand this. Like we want a European welfare state, essentially, which I've been there. It can work, but you have to tax the shit out of people to get there. And that's actually an honest argument to make. What is a dishonest argument to make is that you're going to get there by cutting taxes, especially cutting them in this way, by the way, which is federalism, does not allow you as a U.S. senator to cut property taxes. Derek Thompson had a whole series of tweets about how this is unworkable at the federal level, but he had a funny tweet, which he kind of rolled up all of our politics, not just Abdul al-Sayed, but said, like, if you take together the entire story we're being told about taxes in our political system right now, it's that we can't tax the poor because they're poor. We can't tax the working class because they work. We can't tax tips because that's just unfair. We can't tax businesses because they create work. We can't tax property because homeowners have had it enough. We can't tax billionaires because their contributions are so precious. And we can't tax pensioners because they've earned it. Add to that, we can't tax the property of boomers because fill in the blank. This is my problem in a nutshell with this group of people, because they are not honest. They package this as courage. Just saying shit you can't do is not courage to me. It's actually lying. It's the opposite of courage.
So it's interesting. So let me try play devil's advocate here, which is that I suppose what you could do, and I don't know if this is what he's saying, but if giving it the best, most favorable read, what you could do at the federal level is you could create a tax deduction equal to a property tax freeze, right? So you could say, just to speak about your federalism.
Yeah.
Right. Is you could say, okay, we're going to create a situation where if you show that this is what your property taxes were, and this is what they've risen to, so that gulf there, we are going to that delta, we're going to give you a tax credit or a deduction for that. So you could functionally do that. Now, to your second thing, I see what you're saying, and what's interesting about it is that it kind of presents the pragmatic problem that centrists or incrementalists or just the establishment or more moderate Democrats or whatever run into, which is the limitations of what is possible. And I think that this is DSA candidates running into the limitation of what is possible, which is probably what somebody like Abdul al-Sayed would like to see, is something like universal basic income, something that really is more explicit socialism, right? And that is probably a bridge too far to sell politically. He's probably made that calculation, or maybe he's just made the calculation that you're not going to get it done. And so, yeah, I think you have a fair argument here to say, so now you're substituting that because you can't get what you really want. And instead of having the courage to say what you really want, you're trying to do an end around. The other way to look at it, if I just keep trying to see every side of it, is in the Mamdani-esque world, this is the Michigan version of a rent freeze, right? Because there's just more home ownership in a place like Michigan than there is in a place like New York City, or at least people who need this sort of relief are more likely to own homes whereas in New York, they're more likely to be renters. But your point is a fair one, that if he's running for governor and makes that claim, then it doesn't raise any bells at all, because that's something you could do at the state level.
Yeah, I think what's missing often in these conversations is what's the trade-off? What's the sacrifice you're asking of people, right? And it often never comes, right? We're being sold that we can actually, pre this, it was still unworkable. It was basically, we're going to tax billionaires and do 100 different, we're going to double dip into that funds that we get from taxing billionaires 100 times, right? And I'm for taxing billionaires a lot more. It just doesn't give you enough money to do the things you're promising. Now, what it certainly, like what will guarantee it doesn't is if you also cut taxes for boomers who've been accumulating all this wealth. Now there's another way to do it, right? Which is poor boomers. Right, that's a different argument. That's not the argument.
If you means test it, but it's very hard to do from the federal level, right? And it's interesting in that it's sort of the reverse of what the Bush tax cuts did in response to the Tea Party movement, right? Where they cut taxes at the federal level to a point where they also really cut the federal funding that was coming to the state level. And because I remember I was in the legislature at this time, so they cut the funding, federal funding coming to the states, and then the states were like, well, we want to cut taxes too. So they turned around and they cut state taxes. And now they had to balance their budget. And so what ended up happening was the state money that was going to the municipal and the county level was they were the last one holding, holding the bag. And as a result, you saw large property tax increases. And that's what's happened in the county where I live now, is there's been these big property tax increases. And there's a huge reform movement toward property taxes as a result, but it is the long trail that comes from those federal to state tax credits or tax cuts that have happened over the last 15 years.
Yeah, and anybody who lives in California knows this intimately, which is they have a backdoor version of this, which I forget, prop whatever, which is that the people who own their houses a certain amount of time get their property taxes frozen, which essentially means that the young are subsidizing the old property owners. And that just increases the burden on everybody else. It's bad policy. It's not progressive policy for the most part. And this is my thing to Abdul, and I've said this a number of times with him, and it played out in the defund debate that CNN. Aaron Burnett did a big segment on the past 2 nights. He's claiming he never said defund the police. He's for defunding the police. He's claimed that multiple times, and in some ways, like dismissively. CNN, Aaron Burnett, dig up old tweets that Abdul had deleted saying he's for defund the police. Abdul then reacted to that saying, nobody cares about my old tweets. It's about the people I meet on the trail. And then they found audio as well of him saying to people, he's for defund the police. Now, you know what makes people cynical about politics? It's when you lie to them. That's what makes people cynical. And so for Abdul and his campaign and the people who practice this kind of politics, if you want to be anti-establishment, tell the truth to the voters. Because that's how we break from this cycle, right? Like, it can't be you're allowed to lie, but if you have Chuck Schumer's stamp on you, you're not allowed to lie. Like, how about nobody lies to the voters? Like, why don't we start there? That's my proposition.
Now you're just talking crazy.
Yeah, that's my proposition. Let's just not lie to the voters, period. And to be clear, like, I find this like a very troubled race for Democrats. Mallory was my candidate because I felt like she would have been the diplomatic choice that would have held together the Dearborn, Detroit with the Bloomfield Hills and maybe Northern Peninsula. I think this is going to be a hard race. I think whoever emerges from this is going to have a hard time selling the quote unquote other side. I think Abdul is going out of his way to piss people like me off, with this kind of shit, like just going out of his way. Like any chance I would have had to even bat my eyes that way. I don't live in Michigan, but the equivalent of me, and if people want to denigrate me, no offense to the Hodaris and the Bloomfield Hills people, but put me in that camp, whatever. There's tons of people who think like me over there. They're going out of their way to make it as hard as possible with those types of people.
The funny thing about all this is that I would imagine that the people on the Saeed campaign probably thought that this was a move to the middle because I genuinely think that's probably how they saw it, because when you're focusing on seniors as a young candidate, when you're trying to speak directly to seniors and you're talking about tax cuts, they may very well have been like, let's make this nod toward centrism and demonstrate that we can be a good general election candidate. And we got some news, by the way.
Breaking news. All right, we have a statement from the Maine Democratic Party. While the Platner campaign remains focused on distracting from the job of defeating Susan Collins in November with false accusations against us, the Maine Democratic Party remains hyper-focused on developing a representative, transparent, and inclusive process to select a new nominee when he chooses to withdraw from the race. While we may be frustrated with Graham Platner's continued efforts to manipulate this process, we are so thankful for his supporters and all their efforts to defeat Susan Collins. They are a vital part of our party and deserve to participate in an open process to select Platner's replacement. So doesn't add much teeth, but seems like they're going to move forward and articulate a process.
It's a little bit of a escalation in rhetoric.
Yeah. Okay. I got a fun clip for you.
Okay.
So apparently Usha Vance has this like story time hour, which like is like where she reads books to kids. And invited Donald Trump onto the show.
See, that's not a smart thing to be doing.
Now, this is one of those things where obviously I hate Trump, like anybody listening to this, so I don't want people to misinterpret this. But sometimes he is just so funny unintentionally that it's like some of the funniest things in American life are just how insane he is.
Jeremy says he doesn't have this clip. So you just
this was a late one. Oh, I'll have to describe it. It's actually easy to describe. So she invites him on to do this book about the former presidents, right? Now, anybody who's done a story time, you're a politician.
Yeah,
I'm a principal. We do it all the time. You get the book, you read the line to the kids. They're sitting there. Sometimes you get them to read with you. Then you show them the picture. You move on. Maybe you take some questions. You keep going. Now, Trump doesn't read. So what makes the story time interesting is that he can't read. I mean, I'm sure he can if he really wanted to, but we all know that they have to give him videos to get his intelligence briefings, and his attention span is so bad that what you get in this clip is Trump. Each time it comes, he's just narrating what he thinks about each president. He'll be like, yeah, like Obama, not as good a basketball player as he claims he is. Reagan, handsome guy, Reagan. Like, this is how he's talking. And so it's quite a clip.
Just a little side anecdote is that I had been asked to talk to a lot of kids as a state legislator. I'd never been asked to come and read to kids until I was Secretary of State. And so I was doing it. But at this point, my son, our oldest, was so young that while I had, he was like a tiny baby. So I had like read books, but I had no experience reading to a classroom of kids. And I was actually really freaked out by the idea. I thought I was going to look really awkward. So I remember doing a thing in the Secretary of State's office where like, it was somebody else's idea. 3 or 4 staffers sat on the floor and I actually practiced reading a children's book to them. Turned out it was not at all hard to do. And I had no trouble doing it.
Well, because you could read.
Because like I understood they were children, and
now you have kids.
But I didn't have kids, and anyway, just kind of a funny memory.
Well, I'll unless you have anything meaningful to say about these next two, we'll skip these next two.
Actually, can I say something about Albania?
Yeah. Okay. Maybe give the context a little bit to the audience.
Okay. So some people may have seen a clip going around a while back about Ivanka Trump talking about this beautiful island that she and her husband just found off the coast of Albania, and how now they're developing it and everything. Well, it turns out Jared Kushner, her husband, paid close to $2 billion to Albania to buy this island. And it's this long held, naturally preserved island that's like a crown jewel of, just of Albania and of the other countries that have over time owned it over, centuries. And they just sold it, and they're like putting a casino hotel on the thing. And it has sparked it's a big part of the Flamingo Revolution, this huge movement in Albania. And I just wanted to say, like, my own perspective on it is, as somebody who worked with Albania to evacuate a lot of Afghans and will never set foot in the nation of Albania in my life, because there was a point at which I owed a lot of money there. And now I don't anymore, but there are some people still pretty sore about it. I will just say that I think that
Taken. You don't want to mess with the Albanians.
Right. Yeah, the people in the
favorite
street.
Villain.
Yes, the people in the street have a beef because, as I recall, it would just, we didn't violate any laws or we didn't do any bribery, but it just did not feel like the most above board process to do business with their government. Is what I'd say, and that's the kind of thing that the guy in charge of negotiating peace in all these places, that's what he engages in his side hustle as a real estate developer.
Well, shout out to the Albanians. They play a small part in my novel. Love the Albanians. My college girlfriend, Jola Rucci, if she's listening, shout out to her. Very beautiful woman. Great country. I don't like how they do you wrong in all these movies. Always the villains.
Never been there. Really appreciate their help in the past. Never been there.
It's very, they're actually very close culturally to Italy, but they don't get enough credit for that. Rahm Emanuel is heading to Israel to deliver a speech on U.S.-Israeli policy that I think is notable about the direction of the party. Now, I think Rahm gets painted with a certain brush because his dad was born in Israel and he's Jewish and he's got a certain demeanor to him. But he, from my I worked in national security while he was there, had a pretty rough relationship with Netanyahu, who called him like a fake Jew or something like that. So I think he in some ways is misrepresented on some of these things, but I'll read 2 paragraphs from this Political article just to give you a sense of what he plans to say. Going forward, Emanuel plans to say Israelis should regard U.S. support as expressly contingent on reviving a serious commitment to Palestinian sovereignty, on rejecting dreams of asserting dominion beyond official borders in pursuit of greater Israel, on abandoning a security strategy that emphasizes brutally effective military force with scant attention to diplomacy or credible next plans in Gaza and Iran. U.S. administrations of both parties have spent too long averting our eyes from Israeli misjudgments and strategic misadventures. Emanuel's speech reads, the country once lauded as being a prosperous high-tech democracy is now more commonly viewed as a pariah. Manuel's speech represents an opening bid on some possible answers. He says Israel is now rich enough that it should receive no U.S. subsidy for its military procurement. He says he's prepared to levy sanctions against people who participate in violence against Palestinian civilians or property, and notably against companies and banks who support building in Israeli settlements in occupied areas of the West Bank. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it pretty clearly. I mean, Rahm Emanuel's a very smart guy and a very effective political tactician. I actually, oddly, forgiven the world I was running at that time. I've never met Rahm Emanuel. I've met his brother. I've never met him. So I don't have any personal assessment of him like you might from working around him. I imagine he probably does believe all this, but the effort to get out front, he's clearly running in 28. He clearly sees like this is a non-negotiable position for a Democratic nominee probably in 2028. And he feels like he wants to be one of the first ones to take that position, given that people would very possibly, given his background, doubt the sincerity of that position if it were taken in a year or two.
Yeah, I think people forget how bad the relationship between Obama and Netanyahu was. I know a lot of people wanted Obama to do more, but that relationship was really bad. Actually, Clinton, Netanyahu, not great either. Bill Clinton. And obviously Netanyahu shat on Joe Biden. He's probably the best president, if you're Netanyahu, the best president you could have possibly had, because he supported Israel. And I know a lot of people are critical of Biden for that, while not enabling them in the way that Trump did, that actually like enabled the even worse aspects of them. I'm going to write something, I think next week or the week after, where I lay out what I view as a isolationist Middle Eastern policy, which I think is both winning politics and the right policy for the U.S., meaning broadening out the conversation. Because I have this sense that we're indexing so much to one-line statements in our races, including like city council races and stuff across America, where you have no policy, right? So people are like, do you think it's a genocide? Do you think Israel should exist? What do you think of Hamas, right? And people are being asked to answer these questions, and they're being used as moral tests. And then we're spending so little time on the downstream implications of your answers. Like, well, then what does it mean, right? And what I would propose to people is shortcut right to that answer. If I were a candidate today, I would say, look, here's what I believe. We have very little reason to be involved in the Middle East at all anymore. We're energy, quote unquote, independent, and we don't need anything from the Middle East anymore. So anything we do there should be out of a sincere belief that it's the right thing to do. And so what we need to do is take a step back. That means no money in arms to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Israel, go down the list, and then say, if anybody's in trouble, a la Kuwait 1990, we'll come around and we'll make sure that we will play an active part in keeping the peace. We don't want anybody to be eradicated. That includes Israel, right? We want everybody to be safe, but we're not going to insert ourselves into these conflicts anymore. We're not going to take jets from Qataris. We're not going to, allow the Saudis to throw their weight around in this country. That whole region is effing screwed and is pulling us down under the water with us. And we're, in a lot of cases, willingly going along with it. It's corrupting our politics. It's dividing us. So let's cut to the chase. And what I think the isolationism specific to the Middle East does, and I'm not an isolationist in other areas, but what it does is it says, all right, let's move on to other things in our politics. And it means also that the activists, like to me, like I get a lot of these things where they're like, say this, say that. I'm like, I know this is satisfying if you want me to say the right thing, but what would be more satisfying is if I told you I don't want to send any more arms to that country. I don't want to give them any more aid, right? But I would also like you to join me in saying, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, all these other countries, you have no reason to support them either. So let's join hands and say enough with this. We're the United States of America. So that's the policy that I believe in at the moment. I know that will actually piss off a lot of people, but I was just thinking about it. I'm like, I believe that, but I also think like it's good for our politics to just cleanse ourselves from all of this,
It's a really interesting idea. I'm very excited to see what kind of response you get.
Yes. I actually think my Israeli friends will be more mad at me, but I'm like, look, like I'm American, it's like at a certain point, I don't want any country's politics dominating our politics as much as anything going on here. I don't want a jet from Qatar. I don't want our comedians getting, like being paid to go talk to the Saudis. I don't want Jared Kushner and the Trump White House being bought by the Emiratis. I don't want AIPAC deciding races. Like, I just don't want any of this,
I think the most important part of what you said is when you say, like, we will step in to protect populations, whether it's Israel or anybody else.
For sure. And I think we could, there's a way you can ensure that is credible, right? Without doing all the things we're doing right now, which is invading Iran, shipping arms to this person, shipping arms to that person, getting involved in what the capital should be of this country or that country, or like allowing the sovereign wealth funds of certain countries to buy up critical U.S. assets and bribe our politicians, right? Like, enough.
The truth is,
we can all agree on this. Not all, but a lot of people would agree with that.
The biggest, and this is not stating anything that people haven't figured out, but the biggest force pushing back against that sort of strategic disengagement are people who make arms. I mean, it's people who make big planes and bombs and things like that. And we've known that for 100 years.
Right.
So it's, all right, let's go to this last one that we kind of saved for last, the controversy over the World Cup. Ravi, you want to tee it up or you want me to?
Oh man. I don't know how much I can piss off people anymore in 1 week. Trump made a call to FIFA. One corrupt.
He is the Peace Prize recipient.
Yeah,
so
one corrupt guy.
Right.
FIFA is notoriously corrupt. Nobody needs to. If you're following anything, it's not a controversial statement. We had Qatar, right, who hosted the World Cup. I mean, come on. So Trump called them. Now we don't know how everything worked out, but he got a red card lifted. Doesn't really matter what the details are. I think most people acknowledge that no other country is getting that treatment. Maybe Russia or somebody who can threaten somebody or is willing to bribe somebody. And I'm not saying that bribes actually happened, but it just...
I think a lot of it had to do with us being the host country, less so than it being Trump. Like that's why the special treatment, probably. I think if this were the Qatar World Cup, a lot less likely that they heed that request, if that's indeed what happened.
Well, I told you this on the phone yesterday. I got in like heated text with my own liberal friends over this, who were like, what they were saying to me was, and it's like, I'm not rooting against the United States. I just think this is like your dad who donates a lot of money to the sports league, calling the sports league and contesting some kind of call against you. It's like, it's embarrassing. That's my main point. It's embarrassing. The U.S. World Cup is trying to build its legitimacy, our soccer. And we built a lot of goodwill, and now it looks like we're asking for special treatment. And it wasn't worth it. Obviously, we got our asses kicked anyway, but we didn't know that before. But just every team, and I know this as a Bills fan, I don't want to open that can of worms, can get a call that you disagree with. Like, it happens in every sport. And that there's a difference between that and exerting pressure or whatever on the body that makes that decision. They had not overturned a red card since 1964. Okay, that's all we need to know. That is not a thing they do. So it's like in World Cup play, they had not done that. So it just pissed me off. I'm not rooting against our country. And so Dave Portnoy, whoever's listening, don't come after me over this. I'm not rooting against the U.S. It just bummed me out. It was stupid.
Well, there's been a lot of soccer commentators who have said that it actually really hurt the United States. And I think they're right, because when you think about the psychology of that team, they had already made it so much farther than they were supposed to go. And a lot of the way you do that as an underdog is you play with reckless abandon and you feel like there's really no pressure on you, because if you're going so much further than you're expected to, and you are the plucky underdog, you're able to be in a psychological space where you can relax. You don't play tight, because like, we've already achieved so much and already we're a success story. So now you just get to play the game and have fun. And that seems to be ever since, like, basically they beat Paraguay. I think that was the opening game, which people didn't expect them to win that game in the way that they did. from that moment on, the team really has played like a team with a great deal of psychological safety because they're like, we're on house money. And when Trump did that, which Trump, let's be clear, did to make it about himself, because that's why Trump does these things. That's the biggest story right now. Well, I will become a part of that. We don't even know necessarily if that's the reason. I mean, it may be that FIFA did it because they're like, this is the host country, and we want to make sure, as many people in America watch this. I mean, they may have been planning to do this already because they wanted to mess with things. But as soon as Trump makes that call and puts himself in a position to take credit for it, which he did, you completely change the energy of the game. You go from Belgium feeling like they're playing tight because they're expected to win, and it's always feels differently when you're expected to win, and the United States feeling like, hey, we got nothing to lose here, let's just go play, to, hey, all this stuff happened, it was basically set up for us. If we don't win now, it's embarrassing. And Belgium feeling like, well, now we have bulletin board material, and if we don't win, it's because Trump intervened, and if we do win, it's just a bonus. So I think it actually really screwed them in retrospect.
The rhetoric got so heated too. It's funny. I was watching. What was I doing that? I forget. But I was watching it. I was looking at the commentary without watching the game, and what I saw was just everybody trash talking our players. Now I'm sure they played poorly. I have no doubt about that. I saw some of the clips, but I'm like, what is it like? Just like everybody take a step back. Like, it's like we got farther than most, farther than our ranking would suggest. Everybody can have a bad game. And I think these takes about young people in sports in general, like I know a lot of people were mad at Puslik and then the goalie, which I saw that. It's like, I don't think anybody would look back on anything they're saying in that game a year later and be like, that was reasonable. Like, I'm looking at just very unreasonable things people say about this stuff. And it's like, just relax. They're a better team. They were ranked better than us and they outplayed us, and it's fine. Like, people can have a bad game. Like, it's people's character.
It stinks the way it leaves like a bad taste in everybody's mouth about what has been just such an awesome ride. And I feel bad for the players. Like, what I really hope is that this really a really amazing run that they went on in, like, let's be honest, the one sport that we've never, like, and I'm talking only on the men's side, because on the women's side we're like a powerhouse. This is the one sport where America internationally has never really dominated much at all, or even been in it. And now you make this kind of magical run, and are people going to remember this? And that stinks. And yeah, the way people watch sports, I've probably said this before, but it's one of the fun things for me about being a youth sports dad now. So True's almost 13, and he plays basketball, soccer, and baseball, and he plays baseball very competitively, and he plays the others like for his school, but he plays like club baseball, right? And I still play baseball, right? So like, I still play many games this summer, all that. A lot of people listening to the show know that. That is such a gift to me when I'm watching my kid play, because it means I always have a fresh reminder of how hard the game is. So I'll be sitting in the stands, and a ball will be hit and a kid misplays it or whatever, and I'll hear their parent or another parent like really upset with them and like shouting instruction or being very negative. And the whole time I'm thinking, oh, I did that 2 weeks ago, because this game is impossible. And so it carries over to like when I watch him play basketball, which I haven't played really competitively since high school, or when I watch him play soccer, which I've never played competitively, to where I just am able to remember that like sports are actually really hard. They're designed to be really hard, and you're supposed to make a lot of mistakes, and things that look like easy things to do and dumb mistakes are actually really hard, and you would have been way worse. And I think it's made me not just better at watching my kid and other kids play, it's also made me better at watching sports generally. Like when I'm watching the Chiefs and a guy drops a wide open pass, I'm not mad at that guy. you know, I'm disappointed, but I'm like, boy, I bet that guy is more disappointed than me. And I bet he's trying as hard as he can. It's so I just think the further we all get away from the time when we played competitive sports, like you still play competitive tennis, that helps. The further people get away from that, the more of a revisionist memory they have. And when you mix it with the politics of the moment, boy, people probably are real. And with gambling, and the fact that people have money on these games, I bet people are more brutal to these athletes than they've ever been. I think that's too bad.
Well, I guess we can leave that as the one for us. We did anticipate this when we were doing the sports pod, which I missed doing, by the way.
Yeah, me too.
We talked about how the World Cup and the Olympics were going to be ruined by Trump, and one for two so far. Never mind the hydration breaks, which is not Trump's fault, but like is blamed on America.
It's just that's us, man. We're a host country. We're like, oh, there's room for more capitalism. Sure.
Like, regardless of whether it's a good or bad change, it's just embarrassing.
Just to run
this is our imprint on this game. So, yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, this was a rich episode.
All right. Yep. Thanks everybody for listening. You can find me at Jason Kander everywhere. You can find Ravi at Ravi M. Gupta everywhere. Please leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.